In our last lesson, we saw how to apply a few subtle CSS animations to a boring old button to make it seem much more interactive. In this lesson, we'll see how to apply transitions to a drop-down menu and how to use JavaScript to change its state rather than just the hover state. So let's go ahead and create a new folder here, and we'll call it drop-down menu. Drag that into Sublime Text. Create a new index.html file. Add some boilerplate to it like we've been doing. And now for our markup, we want to make a drop-down element and have an anchor inside of it that says drop-down. And we're going to put a nav element inside of that drop-down element. So whenever somebody hovers over this drop-down div, it'll affect everything inside of it, including, well, it'll affect this nav element inside of it. So we can say a href. Inside of that, we'll just say sublink and times 3. There we go. Now let's create our CSS file, or our stylus file, in the CSS folder here. Let's come back here and link to that. So CSS style.css. This is all the same stuff we've been doing. Open up terminal. CD to our desktop, CD to our drop-down menu folder, CD to our CSS folder, and then we'll run stylus use auto prefix or stylus watch style.style. Okay, and now just to test that that's working, just make the background red, save, and open this up in a browser. Okay, good, it's working. Okay, and now to make this a drop-down menu, let's go ahead and get rid of this obnoxious red background, refresh, and we're going to say this drop-down, this nav element inside of it, that houses all of our sublinks, max height of 0. And then we're going to say whenever they hover over that drop-down, we want the nav element to have a max height of something big, like 999 pixels. Okay, and when we refresh, nothing happens. We can still see our sublinks here. So what we need to do is come up here underneath max height and say overflow hidden. Now it's gone. Now whenever we hover over, we've got our sublinks. Now let's style these links up so they look pretty. Come down here and say all of our anchors, we want to be display inline block. We want them to have a background color of, we'll say, a light blue color. Come over here and refresh. Give them a color of white, and we'll get rid of that underline. So text decoration, none. Let's give them some padding too. 1em by 2ems. And the font family we'll say is sans serif. Okay. So now whenever we hover over it, these sublinks are still horizontal where we're using display inline block. So let's say all of the nav anchors, all these sublinks, are display block. So we'll save, refresh. All right, looks pretty good. So now we're still getting that jerky motion where we hover over it and it automatically shows everything underneath it and we hover off of it and it's gone. So let's add a transition to our nav element because the max height on our nav element is the thing that's being transitioned, is the thing that's being changed. So we'll say transition all, or we could say max height right here to be specific, but we'll just say all. We'll say 600 milliseconds ease. Refresh, hover over it. So I don't really like how whenever we hover over this, these sublinks take up the full width of the screen, and whenever we're hovering over this part over here, it's still active. So what we can do to fix that is just go down here and under our drop-down div, we can say display inline block. Save that, refresh, and now our drop-down menu actually drops down directly from the drop-down button. When we hover off of it over in this area, it doesn't activate. So you might notice if you hover over this and then hover off of it, there's a slight delay before the menu collapses. In my personal opinion, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes people will hover over something and then hover off of it on accident just a little bit, and they still want to see what they were looking at. And the reason it's doing that is because the max height is going down to 999 pixels and then slowly coming up for that transition. Now, if we had this as something smaller, like say 500 pixels, that delay would be a lot shorter. But we want to make sure that no matter how many items are in it, it goes all the way down. It slides down properly. So we'll kick it back up to 999 pixels. If this is something that really bothers you, there's a Stack Overflow question called CSS transition height 0 to height auto that goes into this in detail, and there are a lot of different solutions. A lot of them use JavaScript to try to check and see how big your nav element is, and then they set the max height according to that. And there's a couple of them though that are particularly good. For instance, this one down here, where he's using translate Y. This one seems to work really well. So if you're, it's a lot more complicated, but it works well. So if it's something that's really bothering you and you can't stand to have that delay, then come check out this Stack Overflow question and this Stack Overflow answer. For simplicity's sake, we're going to keep this basic menu with the max height technique. And now let's say that you wanted to click on it. You didn't want to expand it, but you wanted it to expand whenever somebody clicks on it, kind of like Bootstrap's menus. We need to use JavaScript to do that. So let's come in here and add a script tag, and we'll say the source is Google CDN jQuery. So let's click on that link. Click on jQuery here, and we can grab Google's version of jQuery. And actually, let's just copy over that, paste. And let's add HTTP before this, so it'll work without having to just fire up a local server. And we'll add another script here, and we'll put it in the JavaScript folder, and we'll just call it main.js. So now let's make a JavaScript folder with main.js in it. And just to make sure that it's working, let's add the jQuery ready function here. And we'll say alert 1. And refresh our page, and we get the alert. So good. So now what we need to do is basically reset this max height right here and go ahead and set it to 999 pixels. So we'll say drop down nav CSS max height 999 pixels. And then we want to go ahead and hide that by default so that it's not showing. Refresh, and now whenever we hover over it, it doesn't do anything. So let's add where we click on it, it'll show our menu down here. So we'll come down here and say drop down, and whenever it's clicked, we'll fire this function that says this, which is targeting this drop down element. Find the nav element inside of it and toggle it. So just show or hide it. And let's refresh. And everything works. And if we disable this JavaScript and refresh, we still have our slide down, slide up menu. So it's up to you which one you'd like to use. If you would like to have it so that you can click on it, you just need to add a little bit of JavaScript in there. If you don't mind and you like the slide down effect, then just leave the JavaScript off. In this lesson, we learned how to create a drop-down menu that slides down with a CSS transition. Then we learned how to improve it a bit with jQuery to make it a clickable drop-down. In the next lesson, we'll learn a bit more about the keyframe animations and the animate.css keyframe library.